Now, I'm stopping on the dream for a little bit. There's rest of it, but I want to say this. That when I ask God how long we have before this will happen, it's 10 years. It's what's told in my heart. And that's all I know, is that we've got 10 years before these events happen. It's because of what I said earlier, this is happening to us. And here's what's prophesied by another person. And I think this is the continuation of A. Allen's vision that he didn't get to see, and this person did. It started after I woke one morning. I went to the library and pulled out a plain piece of paper and began to draw out what I had seen. It was as if I was looking down from space onto the United States of America. Right up the middle of the continent, I saw a great split. It looked as a huge bolt of lightning had broken the earth open from the east coast of Texas, where Louisiana is, all the way up to the Midwest. Then I looked over towards New York and surrounding states and saw great areas of darkness. Everything there seemed as if there was no light and no communication. I looked over towards California and saw a large area of land fall into the ocean there between California and New Mexico. It was like a great landslide, and a great wave took off toward the islands in Hawaii, and they were covered with water and completely destroyed. The water was traveling in a direction that was totally against the usual current. Then I looked back up the middle of the continent, where that great split was in the earth. It had smoke and fire rising up out of it, and it was as earthquake had torn the continent right in the middle. There were volcanoes erupting in the north, and the great clouds of suffocating smoke were covering everything in their path. America was devastated. Then I saw a helicopter with the president on board, and they were talking to him to another safe area that had not been destroyed. This is where the president set up headquarters to run the country. Communications coming from Washington or the Pentagon were bleak and not working properly. Business was not as usual because of the darkness in the area. The president set up meetings with Canada, Alaska, and Mexico for immediate communication of what to do with the millions of people who had been affected by the earthquake. Shaking type catastrophe. The problem was that there were very few places found that could handle the influx of homeless and wounded. The destruction was too wide. People were helping their neighbors, trying to deal with what was happening as best as possible. I knew this was the end. For a moment I thought, what am I still doing here? I saw great tent cities being erected to house those who had been displaced. Curfews were set up all across America. Families from city to city and state to state were unable to communicate with each other because there were no communication devices working. No one knew if their family members in one state were dead or alive. If people tried to go downtown or to the next community, they were sent back to their homes. Barriers were at all main intersections with checkpoints in place. Military and police were at the checkpoints at going through neighborhoods. There were complete restrictions on any and all travel to work, school, or church. Military were going from block to block and house to house to look for weapons, food, and water. They were going to put it in one place and give it as they saw fit. People were locking themselves in their homes and trying to hide from the military in fear of having everything they had stored away. It did no good to try to keep anything from them. They would break the doors down on homes, and they beat up the people for trying to hide. There were large trucks that were taking families and splitting them up and taking the people to tent cities. People wanted to stay in their homes, but the military would not let them. If you would not leave, then they would force you to. There was no compassion. The public began to rebel, and then the local police were called to get involved with the military. They were still short of force. Then I witnessed a gang-type militia began to develop among groups of young people. Young men and women who were armed with guns, and I witnessed all these young people took control over areas and even shot and killed people who wouldn't do what they ordered. Many old people were simply shot. It was like watching exterminators kill roaches or rats. There was such a shortage of everything and such fear that these people were completely out of control. Everything was looted and people were hurting other people in ways indescribable. There were Christians here. The rapture had not yet happened. I knew this was during tribulation, perhaps the beginning, pre-tribulation. I saw Christians sneaking over the houses, comforting old people and those who were in great fear and lacking understanding of what to do. They prayed with those people, and many began to repent and turn their hearts to God. The only part that perplexed me was that I don't remember seeing any children, none, with the exception of one little girl who led me through the whole dream. She was at every position of the dream and watched everything with me. She never spoke. She was simply present, and her face was covered with ash, and she was in sackcloth. Her countenance was of sorrow. I did see torture. Christians were being mocked as if this was God's fault, and this had happened as the masses wanted them tortured and made a spectacle. I was dragged out of my house and stripped naked and marched down the street in front of all my neighbors, while they shouted in spite of me and threw things at me. I was embarrassed, but only for a moment. I remember that God was still on the throne and that this would soon be over. My children were not with me. I think the boys had been taken away. I was beaten and hit repeatedly, and then I woke up. The above was just the beginning of A.L. and Dmitry Duduman's dream. Goes on to describe was the Soviet-Chinese attack on American soil by Soviet subs. Many prophets say the Soviets are going to attack from the East Coast, or what is left of it, and the Chinese will take the West Coast in numbers. There will be so many Chinese, they will be like red fire ants swarming on the United States. The numbers will be overwhelming to everyone, and it will happen so fast and swift there is nothing most of us can do. Probably before the invasion, or maybe during the invasion, martial law will be in place across America. This is the time the Christians in the Bible were persecuted, to the point where we might have to be in front of a magistrate with a gun pointed at us, asking if we believe in Jesus Christ. And we will have to say yes, and we will be killed for our beliefs. And I know that to be true, people, because it says it in the Bible. So there's no argument over Bible stuff. Here's the rest of A.A. Allen's vision. And it's perfect with Dmitry Duduman's vision. So I suggest people listen to Dmitry Duduman, read A.A. Allen's vision that I posted on the website. Then suddenly I saw from the Atlantic and from the Pacific and out of the Gulf rocket-like objects that seemed to come up like fish leaping out of the water. High into the air they leapt, each headed in a different direction, but every one toward the United States. On the ground the sirens screamed louder, and up from the ground I saw similar rockets beginning to ascend. To me these appeared to be interceptor rockets, although they arose from different points all over the United States. However, none of them seemed to be successful in intercepting the rockets that had risen from the ocean on every side. These rockets finally reached their maximum height, slowly turned over, and fell back toward the earth in defeat. Then suddenly the rockets, which leapt out of the oceans like fish, all exploded at once. The explosion was ear-splitting. The next thing which I saw was a huge ball of fire. The only thing I ever seen which resembled the thing I saw in my vision was a picture of the explosion of the H-bomb, somewhere in the South Pacific some months ago. In my vision, it was so real it seemed to feel the searing heat from it. What everyone must remember is that Russia and China will only do this when they know that the U.S. has no economy left. How close are we to that happening, people? Think about it. And no resources left. How close is that to happening? Very close. Later is the reason God says, I will come like a thief in the night. No one shall know the day or the hour. The fault line event is up to God and not up to us. But of course, the more we pull away from God, the more expedited these events become. It will be after many calamities and in a time of peace. All I can tell the liberals and the sheeple is to wake up and start praying and reading the Bible regularly, or you will be caught up in these calamities, and you will not know what to do. Now, on to something I need to go over from the woman's prophecy, that is killing of the innocents, i.e. old people or children. That's very disturbing that someone would do that just because they could. And those people will probably go to hell for such a thing, because the old people especially need to be told that this is a time of tribulation and what to do when it happens. They do not need to be killed because people think they are worthless and they are wasting food and money.